Dinosaur creation and research tasks are now handled by a new staff member, the scientist.
They're going to be part of all aspects of dinosaur creation, from the very beginning to the very end.
During the pre-release period for Jurassic World Evolution 2, we were all informed of a new coming system to the game, one that would be, it seemed, some actual management in these management games. Unfortunately, in the cold light of the release, I think it's safe to say that the new system did not gain many friends. In the years since release, nothing much has changed to this controversial system, and asking on Reddit what folks' opinions of it were, well, it brought up some interesting views. The main through argument of many people's posts is that the idea of a staff system in a game like Jurassic World Evolution 2 is perfectly fine. It is the way the system has been implemented which so many people have a massive issue with. One of those on Reddit who responded to me came up with a great quote about the system, and I think it really highlights the problems. Scientists need to be enablers, supporters, not roadblocks. So let's conduct a bit of an autopsy on this system. This is going to be the first part of a two-part video looking at the scientist system, and this part is going to be focused on two key questions. The first being, what are the problems of the current system? And the second being, why the system has been designed like this in the first place. So where shall we start with this utter plane crash? Let's start at the very beginning with that pre-release video.
Dinosaur creation and research tasks are now handled by a new staff member, the scientist.
Here we have the first problem. Did you spot it? It was Adam Woods who proudly stated that dinosaur creation and research tasks are handled by a new staff member, the scientist. Now, this is a little deceptive. Firstly, the way he speaks makes it seem like there are many staff members. However, as we all know, scientists are not a new staff member. They are the only staff member that we get in the game. And as for them being part of dinosaur creation and research, that is equally as deceptive, because those scientists also conduct your fossil expeditions, wild dinosaur rescues, and are also part of healing sick and injured animals. At the very first hurdle then, the game trips and falls flat on its face, breaking its nose. The system is about as deep as a puddle. Adam Woods would like us all to believe in this singular individual, the scientist, who is not only a genetics expert but an architectural engineer, an animal veterinary specialist, and a wild game hunter. And that's when they aren't in the field digging up rare and fragile fossils. Not only is this a massive oversimplification of the real world, but it's also one of the most limited staff systems in a park building game there's been for a while. This fact was demonstrated by a fellow Evolution Square moderator, Colt, who gave a long, detailed list of how many staff other games had. I'm going to just bring up two examples here from the games I've personally played. In Zoo Tycoon 2, your zoos required zookeepers who would look after your animals, clean their enclosures, and medicate them. Zookeepers would also perform talks about the animals to guests, stimulating donations to your zoo. You also had to hire maintenance workers to clean your park and keep things running. You also had to hire paleontologists and scientists if you had the dinosaur DLC, and if you had the marine DLC, you had to hire marine specialists to look after your marine life. And on top of all of those, you could also hire costume-wearing entertainers to look after your guests and keep the youngsters happy. That's quite an in-depth system. Jurassic Park Operation Genesis went for something more simple, but it was still more complex than JWE2's. In JPOG, you had to hire cleaner staff to keep your park clean. Cleaning stations would create up to 5 staff each, and naturally the more staff you deployed, the more expensive it would be to pay off the cleaning costs. This meant you had to balance the cleaning demands of your park with limiting your costs. However, your cleaning staff were just as vulnerable to dinosaur attacks as your guests were, capable of disappearing down some T-Rex's throat. At first you might think that was the only staff in the game, but but that's because JPOG hid other aspects of staff behind other screens. You also had control over your dig teams, being able to hire new fossil teams as required, each one coming with a greater and greater cost. Research was conducted solely through another separate system, with research tasks costing different amounts of money and taking different lengths of time. Two games far older than Jurassic World Evolution 2, far more simple in many respects, but both of which had a more in-depth staffing system with genuine effects to your park. Even more modern titles, some of them released by Frontier themselves, like Planet Coaster, have more engaging staff systems. Jurassic World Evolution 2 boils every task in your park down to a single staff member, creating a bland, limited system, and this then has serious ramifications down the line.
With your scientists, you need to be really careful how you manage them. Each time you assign them a task, they get a little bit of stress. If you don't rest them, then you risk them getting burnt out. And then if they do become burnt out and then you assign them another task, then there is an increased risk of sabotage.
Here is where the ramifications begin. The stress system. On the surface, it seems like an acceptable balancing idea. As your staff complete tasks, they become stressed. When staff get too stressed, then there is a risk of sabotage occurring to your park. Having fallen over at the first hurdle by devolving all tasks to a singular staff type at the start, Jurassic World Evolution 2 reaches the next hurdle and faceplants again, this time knocking out a few teeth. Because every task in your park requires scientist to complete, it means you stress all of your staff together all of the time. The number of staff you can have is limited heavily by the game artificially, more on this later, so stress levels rapidly rise. What do you do when your staff are stressed? Well, you have to pay them to take vacation time. It's a pretty laughable outcome really, because all you are doing here is paying a flat sum of cash to reset your staff, which occurs after a certain period of generic game time. Again, more on this later. So a lot of the time, players of Jurassic World Evolution 2 are sat there fast forwarding game time in order to fast forward the scientists through their reset period in order to recover them to work. This results in a total stalling of the game's pace. Numerous times playing challenge mode or chaos theory, I have been stuck with a dinosaur needing medical treatment or needing to be incubated but can't complete the action because I have staff on reset. All the system does is act as a roadblock. But hold on, I hear defenders of the game say, the stress system is directly connected to sabotage. That's more than just something acting as a roadblock, that adds jeopardy. Well, okay, but let me ask you this. Do you think that the staff of zoos who look after dangerous animals resort to leaving the lion enclosure gates open when they're a little unhappy? Do you think restaurant staff deliberately poison food when overworked? No, they don't. But that's what your scientists do. They think an acceptable response to apparently being overworked is to let your T-Rex leave its enclosure, or to completely shut down all power to your location, or to give your animals a life-threatening case of food poisoning. Yes, that's very ethical, isn't it? Those staff members who act as dinosaur vets, making sure that those animals then die later on from food poisoning. Now, yes, I'm sure the obvious response here is that Dennis Nedry, a computer programmer, not a scientist, conducted serious sabotage to Jurassic Park, so it makes sense. Well, yes, maybe. But that is a very different situation. Not to mention, do you think after Jurassic Park that Jurassic World systems were so designed that a single person could conduct that sort of damage again? Risk assessment would probably prevent that. I mean, these staff don't even send you a sniffy letter or go on strike first. They go straight to the nuclear option and release your raptors all over the park. This makes zero sense. And what's worse is that it really isn't difficult to prevent sabotage. You just send them on regular holidays and you'll never get sabotage from them. Now, some might say this is the mark of a good boss, and maybe it is. But in Jurassic World Evolution 2, all it does yet again is add more roadblocks to your gameplay, slowing everything down. And if sabotage does occur, adding additional annoyance and tedium, having to solve those annoying sabotage acts. Not to mention that the stress level of scientists never actually goes down, it only ever goes up. So even if you don't use a scientist for a prolonged period of time, they will be equally as stressed as the last time you used them, which really doesn't make very much sense.
They each have specific skills that influence the outcome of tasks such as fossil extraction, incubation, and dinosaur welfare. Keeping your scientists well trained and monitoring their stress levels will ensure tasks are completed quickly.
Now this is how Jurassic World Evolution 2 claims your staff can be specialists in something. 3 characteristics, which staff members will have different scores in each. It boils all park activities down to requiring either logistics knowledge, genetics knowledge, or welfare knowledge. Oh dear, Jurassic World Evolution 2 has reached the next hurdle, and this time ends up breaking a leg on it. That's gonna sting. The main issue here is that scientists' skills in set areas do not grow naturally depending on what you have them do. Instead, scientists' skills improve in a totally artificial way, through the addition of skill points, which they gain not through work experience but through researching the tech tree option Staff Improvements 1. Wow, what an in-depth system. What a fucking joke. So instead of your staff naturally becoming better, naturally getting more experienced over time, yet again more on this later, which would then lead to natural skill improvement, you know, like how every single job works in real fucking life, instead you just unlock a button that says add points, and you just add points to that staff member wherever you like. It's a totally antiseptic system, and worse still, it stimulates min-max gameplay. What do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is that it stimulates the player to only find and hire staff with a single high possible score in one aspect, and to just dump all the points into it. Oh, and staff have a hard limit as to how good they can get. This results in the fire rehire gameplay necessary in the early game, where players have to fire staff that are not good enough and hire better ones. A solution that is far too modern day. Instead of seeing staff as an investment, Jurassic World Evolution 2 wants you to fire them and buy better ones. Who cares about staff loyalty, eh? Certainly not Frontier. Ugh. Can you tell how much I hate this awful system? Even writing a script has not helped me not rant about this god-awful system. Anyway, let's move on. So let's just summarize at this point what we've learned. Firstly, that the game fails to create an in-depth staff management system in its management game by boiling it all down to a single staff type. The addition of the skill system and the stress system add artificial roadblocks to your progress that lead to a stalling of the gameplay progression. This is made worse by so many tasks in the park needing staff to oversee it, and the fact that staff remain merely static individuals, not developing naturally as real human beings would, further adding to the artificiality of the system. Moving on, let's look at some of those other minor elements that were not explained in those dev diary videos. Some staff come with traits. These traits can be things like faster research or cheaper incubation. Now again, these buffs would seem like a good idea, but for several big reasons, Jurassic World Evolution 2 now grabs the starter's pistol and shoots itself in the foot. Let's take 2 examples of buffs. Cheaper incubation. Sounds like a great idea. Making dinosaurs cheaper. Spared no expense. The problem, however, is that money really isn't that difficult to get. Unless you're playing on the highest and most annoying difficulties, money flies into your park like you're printing it yourself. So what if this guy reduces the cost of the incubation a little? It really makes no difference. And what about time buffs? Well, time in Jurassic World Evolution 2 is completely meaningless. There are no days, no weeks, no months, and no years. Just generic time, which is occasionally measured in real-time seconds when needed. Talk about immersion breaking. But still, you would think that being able to speed up an activity is a good buff. But they gave us fast forward time options. Do you see what that means? That from the moment you start the game, it's already given every single task in the game a speed up buff. So who the fuck cares if you're a scientist can save a couple more seconds off of that? This isn't bloody Formula 1, where a single second might be the difference between first place and second. It's a park building game. Speed isn't what we're here for. Not to mention, this makes all other aspects of the scientist system, where time is a part of the process, equally as redundant, because again, you can just fast forward through it. Staff numbers are another minor annoyance, and are another form of artificial limitation and roadblock. You see, in park builders like JPOG or Zoo Tycoon 2, your staff numbers are naturally balanced by your income and your outgoings. For example, in Jurassic Park Operation Genesis, the cost of every cleaner you hired added another $150 to your monthly outgoings. This sounds cheap, but this is in a game where your monthly income might only be about $2,000 a month, so staff costs could rack up quite quickly. This is an example of natural balancing and realistic balancing, making sure you ran your park well but kept your staff costs at an acceptable amount. Jurassic World Evolution 2, meanwhile, limits the number of staff you can hire at the beginning, because fuck you, and then only allows you to hire more by adding staff centers to your park. A building type which, of course, needs research to unlock, another artificial roadblock there. And staff costs really don't remain a problem once your parks are up and running, a process that really doesn't take too long. Finally, let's just briefly touch on one last thing. The fact this game has actually removed progress. In Jurassic World Evolution 1, you could have a maximum of 3 research teams and 3 fossil digging teams, which you could have do tasks all at the same time. These were unlocked as rewards for the successful outcomes of your campaign. In Jurassic World Evolution 2, you're limited to 1 fossil expedition at a time. Why? Hang on. Jurassic World Evolution 1 gave you separate staff for research and for fossil collecting. That means Jurassic World Evolution 1 had more staff. The fuck? They actually cut a system down, making it worse. What the So, in conclusion, we have a system which was meant to add meaningful management aspects to the game, but instead, we've ended up with a system which is oversimplified in every aspect. A system where the main features add persistent roadblocks to progress. A system which on the surface looks very deep, but is hampered by elements that do not actually have meaningful impact on gameplay. A system that feels artificial in its progression and unrewarding to players. A system worse than almost every other park management game, including its progenitor and including other games that the same company has made. So, with the issues established, now we must answer the second part of the question. How and why did it end up like this? There is a prevailing belief, I think, when it comes to problems that were inherent with Jurassic World Evolution 1, and something which has then transferred to Jurassic World Evolution 2. That behind every strange choice and every criticism is the greasy hand of Universal. This idea that behind the scenes Universal is sat there like some equivalent of Emperor Palpatine secretly pulling the strings, resulting in these massive flaws with the game. This is very satisfying to think, especially if you want to defend Frontier, a developer that would really seem to know better given Planet Coaster and Planet Zoo. But I think that's too easy, and I think that lets Frontier avoid responsibility. None of us will know for sure who is most to blame, but it seems clear to me that one of the biggest criticisms of the first game was the complete lack of management aspects in what was, according to Frontier, a management game. It seems obvious that the scientist system in Jurassic World Evolution 2 is Frontier trying to respond to that criticism. But there is a fundamental truth about the game and the Jurassic World franchise as a whole that must be mentioned. The fact is that the franchise and the content for it has become more and more aimed at younger audiences. You can see that with things like Camp Cretaceous and the dominance of anthropomorphized dinosaurs, as well as action-heavy movies with cool factor over substance. Jurassic World Evolution 1 was not a game aimed at people who play complex simulator titles. It was aimed at a more casual audience, one that was also probably on the younger side. Jurassic World Evolution 2 has maintained the same problem. This means Frontier has a problem. The game was aimed at a casual young demographic, but complex staff systems are the sort of thing that demographic could struggle with. So they tried to create a system that was simple enough so that everybody could understand it, and the result was it pleased nobody. Then you have the long-lasting negative impact of Jurassic World Evolution 1's gameplay. Instead of a slow pace, which again probably wouldn't appeal to the demographic required, Frontier created a game with a very click-heavy, almost mobile title-esque nature. Something that was simplistic and easy to manage. Something that younger players, who have grown up with smartphones and tablets everywhere, would be able to manage. This same click-heavy, mobile title-like methodology then ended up transplanted to the next game. It made Jurassic World Evolution 2 familiar, but ended up giving it all the same problems, and this then transferred to the scientist system, further hampering it. This all probably wasn't helped by how soon the game was released. Given the huge number of bugs and problems, as well as the limited time between announcement and release, it seems that the game may have been rushed, possibly at Universal's request, and as such, this resulted in the underbaking of the game and its systems. There is also the fact that this game was released on consoles. PC games work very well with lots of windows that you might want open at the same time, that can be easily resized with the mouse and moved around on screen so that you could compare what is on them. Games like Planet Zoo and Planet Coaster demonstrate these aspects. But on console, that is a lot more difficult to manage. I think this also plays into the simplicity of the scientist system. A console player is going to find one screen easier than 2 or 3 separate windows. This is probably a request of Universal to ensure the largest possible player base. But I think it is reductionist to point the finger of blame entirely at Universal's door. I really don't think Universal are as hardcore involved as people seem to believe. Are they really watching over Frontier's shoulders as much as some would like to believe? And even if they were, was it not Frontier's option to reject creating a substandard game with substandard systems and instead rely on the great reception of Planet Coaster and Planet Zoo, and the fact we all trusted and respected Frontier's focus on great park building games to sell a new product? It is, of course, difficult to answer a lot of those questions. Without the option to sit Jurassic World Evolution 2's designers down and grill them about why they made such baffling choices with the scientist system or the game as a whole, all I can do is speculate. Well, actually, there is something more that I can do. In the next part of this video, I'm going to take my own ideas for the scientist system and some from Reddit to establish what my Jurassic World Evolution 2 scientist system would look like. So join me in part 2 to find out more. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you are new here for all the content from us at Tricore Gaming. Until the next video, stay safe and goodbye.